Greetings, my beautiful lovelies. It's Emmy. Welcome back. Today I'm going to be attempting to make something that I've been thinking about for a long time, and it is hand-pulled noodles. Now, I've been thinking about this since I was a kid, really, and my mother's father, my grandfather, used to make noodles, but he would use this stuff, and this is called consui, and this is an alkaline water. And I always wondered what this was for. I said, this is interesting. What is he doing? My mom said, well, he's using that for making his noodles. They give it a particular texture and a particular flavor. And I remember always just being fascinated by that whole process. Now that recipe has since been lost. I asked my mother, I asked my aunt for the recipe for my grandfather's noodles, and we have not been able to find them. So ever since then, I've been really inspired to make hand-pulled noodles. Now, I've looked and looked and looked at different recipes, and all of them seem to be a little bit different. They seem to be more or less complicated. Some say to use more water, some say to use less water, some say you have to use a particular type of flour. Some use consui, some do not. Some use some other alkaline waters. And so I never found a recipe that I could stand by. But recently I just found a recipe by a channel called My Name is Andong, and he has a recipe that he claims is foolproof. Now, I believe he spent some time in China and he's researched this meticulously, and that's why I am convinced to do his recipe, because he breaks down the science of it, which I love. Very much in the Alton Brown kind of vein of researching what exactly is happening food science wise that allows us to take this noodle and to pull it at these beautiful stretchy lengths. If you've never seen a hand-pulled noodle video, it's absolutely mesmerizing and incredible. They take this dough and stretch it and work it for quite a while. They twist it and pull it and stretch it, and then they're able to do this wonderful kind of double math thing where they take the single rope, double it into 2, double it into 4, double it into... It's just really mesmerizing. By the end, they have these beautiful strands of noodles, kind of similar to my dragon's beard video. If you haven't seen that, I was very pleased with that video. Because it actually worked. And that doubling process I did in that video, I did that into the many thousands, and that was really satisfying. But this time we're not going to go that far. We're just going to get ourselves just so we get some nice beautiful strands. So when you see the masters actually making the dough, they can do it in a relative short time. They mix the water, they mix salt, they mix a little bit of consui and the flour together, and they knead it really methodically. But there's a very specific technique. Then they start twisting and pulling, and they can get a batch done in about 15 to 20 minutes. That's a master with master technique. The technique I'm going to be using today actually uses time to develop those strands of gluten rather than kneading. So gluten is the protein that is found inside of flour, and different flours have different gluten contents. So cake flour, for example, has about 5% gluten, and we want less gluten because we want a nice tender cake. Bread flour, on the other hand, has a higher gluten content, more closer to about 12 or 13%. We want more gluten because we like a nice chewy bread. All-purpose flour has 11.7%, which is a little bit less than the bread flour. So it has a little less gluten, so a little less chew, but it's all-purpose, so we can use it for cakes and for making breads. Of course, these percentages are based on US flours. So wherever you live, what you need to do is look at the protein content of your flour and figure out what the percentage is. And that is the best way to figure out kind of an equivalent. Because, for example, this flour, which I've been holding on to for quite a while, I bought in a Chinese market, and this is high gluten flour. So high gluten flour makes me think, oh, this must be in the range of bread flour here in the US. That would be about 12 or 13%. But in actuality, this contains 11 grams per 100 grams of protein. So that is more like all-purpose flour. So very interesting. And this is another Chinese flour, and this is low gluten wheat flour. And if you look at the percentage here, and this has 8 grams per kilogram. So this is about 8%. So this is still actually higher than cake flour, but definitely lower than, say, AP flour. But that's the best way to figure out what kind of gluten content. Just look at the protein content rather than the name of the flour, because that can be misleading because different flours, different countries, right? Okay, or different countries, different flours. So I decided to make 2 different batches. Since I had the Chinese wheat flour, I made a batch with that, 500 grams of flour to 5 grams of salt and 250 grams of water. So then I just mixed this all up until it formed a shaggy dough. You want to just make sure you get all the dry pieces combined into a ball, and then place it into a bowl and cover it well with some plastic wrap and just let it sit. So this process of allowing the dough to rest for a long period of time is called autolyse or autolyse. I've heard both pronunciations and I'm not sure which one's correct, so I'll probably use them interchangeably. So what happens is all the water is being absorbed into the flour, which activates enzymes, which then activate the proteins to start forming gluten. So rather than spending a lot of time kneading to develop the gluten strands, well, the protein is kind of like into gluten strands, we're allowing time to do that. So we don't have to be a master in terms of combining the water and flour and salt together with a special kneading process. We're just using time. So I did this last night and it has been sitting here for about 11 hours. This is the Chinese dough and this one right here is the all-purpose American dough. So I'm going to hopefully be able to knead both of these and then taste them to see if there's any kind of difference. I suspect there won't be too much of a difference because the protein content was pretty similar. Although when I did mix the dough, I did find that the Chinese dough was stiffer and a little bit drier, even though I used the same exact amount of water. So let's go ahead and start pulling this dough. I'm so excited. So here's the dough that was made with the Chinese flour. And because I have the consomme and because it reminds me of my grandfather, I'm gonna go ahead and add it to the dough, although Andong says it's not necessary. Andong also found this really great paper that was written up about the reason why we add salt and alkalized water to our noodle recipe, and it was found that the salt helped with the elasticity of the dough and that the consomme or the alkaline actually firmed up the gluten strands, so it was more about texture, which totally coincides with what my mother and my grandfather said about the use of this. This was to create a firmer, kind of crunchier noodle and also gave it a particular kind of flavor. 3.5 grams of consomme, and I'm just putting it on my dough and we're just gonna work that in. And we're not supposed to add that beforehand. It doesn't feel very stretchy at this point at all. It's not really being very stretchy. And it's kind of tearing. So this process, we're supposed to be aligning the gluten, kind of stretching it and lining it up into a noodly shape. Very stiff dough. Rip. Granted, in Andong's video, he used all-purpose flour. And in Germany, that was about 11%, which is the same almost as the US, which is 11.7. According to the Chinese package, this is just 11% too, though. So this should be the same. Alrighty, so I'm gonna give this dough a little rest. It seems to not want to be stretchy right at the moment, and I want to check out the AP version. The 3.5 grams of consomme, and just work that in there as well. Consomme definitely has a smell to it. It's almost like a sulfurous smell. I also used it in my mooncake recipe, which if you haven't seen, you should definitely check out because I was very, very happy with the results of that video. All right, I'm gonna use the whole amount and see if I can get this to stretch. They sure make it easy looking in the videos. Yes, this one is much readily, it wants to tear too, but it wants to stretch a little bit more readily than the other dough. So stretch it, fold it in half. And with each pull, it seems to be getting more elastic. And then it breaks. Okay, my lovelies, I am back, and it has been about an hour that I've been working both of these bowls of dough, trying to get my dough to the pulling consistency, but it still wants to go back. I put 5 grams of salt. I wonder if kosher salt was not the salt I should have used. Should I have used sea salt or a different kind of salt? I don't know, but I'm definitely not getting the elasticity. So I'm going to put these doughs aside, and I'm going to try another recipe by Peter Looi. Now, his recipe uses cake flour, and I really, really want hand-pulled noodles. I'm feeling a little under the weather. I just want some noodles and noodle soup. So let's try his recipe. I almost forgot to say that I will put links down below to all the videos that I mentioned in this video. 250 grams of cake flour. 1 teaspoon of salt. Next, we're going to add water, and Peter does not specify how much water exactly he uses. He uses alkaline water, and I'm using 1 gram of consommé to about 150 milliliters of water. That's an estimation because, like I said, he doesn't say exactly how much water to add. He says just until it makes a dough. So let's just try this, shall we? Here we go. I'm just adding a little at a time. And he does make a point to say not to add too much water because we can't, of course, take the water out. Okay, so this is shaggy and shreddy, but I think it is forming a dough. So I'm going to stop on the water there, and I'm going to head and put this in the mixer. And Peter needs this for a very long time in the mixer. He says for 2 hours, which seems insane. But let's go ahead and try it. Alrighty, my lovelies, I am back. It has been 2 hours. I've let the dough mix for a full 2 hours, and it did take the entire amount. I was hoping it would take less time because I was using a relatively small piece of dough, but no, 2 hours it was. So after I took it out of the mixer, I also added a ½ teaspoon of additional salt because in Andong's piece, he said that salt was very important for elasticity, and I use kosher salt, and kosher salt tends to be less salty than regular table salt. And since Peter didn't specify what type of salt he used, also in Andong's recipe he didn't specify what type of salt he used, but I was hoping because I was weighing it out it would be more accurate, but perhaps not. And I also added additional water to this dough as well. In Peter's recipe, his dough was very sticky, and when he was kneading it, I noticed that it would kind of stick to the surface of the table. When you wrap it in the plastic wrap, it does feel a little bit sticky, but as you're working it and stretching it, it's not sticky at all. And this is the consistency of the dough. No one ever shows you close up what the dough consistency looks like, but this is what it looks like. Very stretchy, and in baking, they sometimes do this kind of window pane test to see if you have enough gluten, and it's definitely doing that. You can see through it. Look how thin it is. So this dough is much more supple and willing to stretch than my other 2 doughs. So I'm hoping I can get a batch of noodles out of this. So after I took this out of the mixer, I've been stretching it, aligning the gluten, and doing this, taking the dough, stretching it out, kind of dropping it and whipping it down, and then rotating it to get it to kind of spin. And what we're doing here, and that is theatrical, but there is a purpose, we are aligning and getting the gluten protein stretched enough so that we can pull this to make noodles. So stretch, snap it down, snap it down. You can bang it on the table if you want. It does make a lot of noise. And then rotate one arm forward and one arm back, and you'll get that twist. I was trying to flick it before, and that's really not that effective. You just have to turn your arms. So, and also you want to adjust the dough. There'll be some thick parts and some thin parts, and you kind of want to just squeeze it to kind of make that even. So whip it down, whip it down, whip it down, and then pull, and then rotate. Again, whipping it down, pull, 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 spin. This is a 250 gram batch, so this is a relatively small batch, enough for a couple people maybe, but much easier to manage than a full kilogram is what Peter shows in his video. But I think that's what they do in those kind of master noodle maker videos where they're wielding giant pieces of dough. And it's strenuous, let me tell you. Just when I was working the 500 gram pieces of dough, yeah. I think those ones were just also too elastic too. Okay, so I think we're getting close. So I've got some more cake flour here. And I'm gonna flour the surface. Now this is supposed to prevent the noodles from sticking. So we're gonna roll this out into a log as long as that we can manage. And he said that your end should be a little bit fatter than the middle. Now what we're gonna do is pull it and then rotate it in and then stretch it, pull it, and each time we're gonna double the amount of noodles. So right now I've got one fat noodle. I'm gonna pull it, bring it in, stretch it. Now I've got two. Make sure I have enough flour, pull it, stretch it over, pull it. Now I've got four. Pull it in small increments. 1, 2, 1, 2. Grab it, pull this here, pull these loops. Now I've got 8. 1, 2. Okay, this is happening. Stop talking. 8. Get some more flour. Ooh, some of these noodles are fat. This is not easy. I think I'm at 16 now. 32. Ooh, that one broke. But I'm getting noodles. 64. That's enough for me. I did it! I have hand pulled noodles. Yay! Oh, I'm so pleased. Okay, so now what we're gonna do is take our noodles, plunge these into standby water. Just added a little bit of spinach to that. We finally did it! I can't believe it. Now let's gonna fish our noodles out. Now these noodles are not exactly pretty. I've got some fatties here and I've got some thin ones, but you know what? This is my first time ever making hand-pulled noodles, and I am so excited that I actually got noodles. I'm okay with this. So we're gonna put this here. I'm so happy I actually got noodles. Alrighty, I've got some homemade chicken broth here. Ladle that in here. Oh my gosh, it's exactly what I need. Oh, it smells so good. And I like to add white pepper too. Lots of white pepper. A healthy dose of green onions right on top. That's it. Alrighty, let's go ahead and taste our noodles. I'm so excited. It smells so good. Hand-pulled noodles, finally. Thank you, Peter. Thank you, Andong. Oh. All right, here we go. Look, that looks beautiful. Here we go. Itadakimasu. Those are delicious. Look at that big fat one right there. They've got a bit of a bite to them, but they're not that chewy. And I'm not sure if that has to do with the flour ratio, but the cake flour definitely worked better for me than the all-purpose flour or the Chinese high gluten flour. Maybe I have to mess with the salt ratio. Maybe I should try table salt next time rather than the kosher salt. I think I'll do that. I like my noodles to be a little bit chewier. Maybe I should have cooked these a little less. Oh, that broth is so good. The amount of salt is delicious. It's tasty. I have a feeling that kosher salt was not the way to go for this recipe. I think next time I'll try using table salt instead and see if that makes a difference, and still use the high gluten Chinese flour or the all-purpose flour, because these are not as chewy. Although they do have a nice bite, and I suspect that has to do with the consommé or the alkaline water. That alkaline water also gives it a very kind of professional tasting noodle taste. Alrighty, thank you guys so much for watching. I hope you guys enjoyed that one. I hope you guys learned something. Please share this video with your friends. Follow me on social media. Like this video, subscribe, and I shall see you in the next one. Toodaloo, take care, bye! My stomach's like, what is that? That's food, that's delicious. Yummy.